So I'll introduce Denny Rickards. I actually first fished with him 25 years, 30 years ago, I think. I went on a trip with him to Montana with him and Jay Fair for a week. So here we go. Famous Stillwater.
The reason I'm looking you guys over is see how many of you I recognize that I've seen on the water in the past. You guys, most of you probably got your start in the fly fishing sport on streams and rivers, and I imagine most of you guys are still doing that. Some of you do salt, some of you do salmon steelhead. Stillwater is the fastest growing segment of the fly fishing industry. And it's just too bad that a lot of the shops that I go into, the products that are available to you are limited. The fly lines from all the companies that make them, they really don't tell you how to use them, and they should. I spent probably 20 years with the Cortland Line Company developing the Stillwater side of their business. And in order to tell you what I've learned, I've been doing this now for 63 years. You guys, when I started back in the 60s, there were no products for Stillwater. There were no books. There were no articles written. The rods that we used were glass or bamboo. A seal bugger or a woolly bugger wouldn't be invented for another 15 years. And if you look at the products that you have available today, ask some guy that's nymph fishing a river somewhere if he has any chironomids, and he'll look at you kind of funny because it's not a word that we use on moving water. It took 20 years after that before that word appeared in the dictionary. So the reason I'm telling you this is because so many of the people that I see you guys on the water are struggling. They don't think so. But I see them doing a lot of things, and you guys are part of that group. That it's not that you can't catch fish. Here's the typical way we go about it. Stop and think about this, you guys, the last time you fished. You want to catch big fish or you just want to catch fish? I have there's a hatchery about a mile from where I live, and I spend a lot of time down there talking to these guys. And when it comes to catching big fish, you know what the ratio is between moving water and still water for big fish? 20 inches or better. It's about 7-to-1. For every 20-inch fish you catch in a stream or river, there's 7 in a lake. So if there's 100 big fish in a river, you've got 700 in a lake. So it's easier to catch a big fish if you're going to do still water. And if you think about fish that are 8 pounds or better, that ratio jumps up to 50-to-1. That gives you a whole lot more opportunity to hook big fish. But the problem, you guys, ladies, is that the way we go about it, everybody thinks, and I've been guiding, for over 50 years. And when I have clients out there, the things that I've learned, that I've written in a book, I always kept a little notepad up here. And when I first started, I didn't have a freaking clue what I was doing. I did what most of you guys probably do. You take the flies or the tackle that you have, and that's what you apply from streams and rivers and try it on a lake. There's certain things that I'm going to dispel that, in my opinion, are myths that you don't know to be wrong, but you'll see when I explain it why I feel that way. The things that I've learned, you guys, over 60 some years of fishing lakes, I don't remember. Let's see, I average probably somewhere between 500 and 700 trout a year over 4 pounds. I do it because I still get in 100, 150 days a year. And if you lived and fished on Upper Klamath, which is my home lake, those are big fish down there. It's hard to catch a fish down there that isn't 4 pounds or better. So the opportunity of hooking big fish, and the real test comes when you go to lakes that you don't know. If you guys are out there, imagine when you get in your boat, you go out. Tell me if this doesn't fit your MO. If you fished for, say, 15, 20 minutes and you haven't had a strike, you know what you're going to do? You're going to get that fly box out because you're going to assume that the fly you have, it doesn't match what they're eating. Am I right? So we look for another pattern. The answer isn't in the fly box, guys. When you think you bring the fly in and you look at it and you say, well, they're not eating this, you make an assumption that you shouldn't make. And that assumption is that the fish was there and saw it. How do you know he was there and saw it? You don't. So you end up using a trial and error approach. Was it the wrong fly? Wrong retrieve? You got the right line? How about leader length, tippet size, where you're fishing, when you're there, how deep are you going? What's the angle of your fly? All of those things, mess one of those things up and it can keep that fish from taking your fly. You guys, catching big fish on lakes is not about the fly. You've heard the expression that you learn from your mistakes. You don't learn anything from your mistakes. You learn by what you do right. So if you have a fly that's working, God, I think back over all these years, you aren't changing it. If you got a spot that's producing, you aren't moving. If you have a retrieve that's working or a line that's working, you aren't changing it. So it's repetition. And if you go out and you catch some fish, it's reinforcing in the back of your mind, oh, I've got the right fly. You guys, every fly that was ever designed and tied is tied to do one thing, imitate food. And when we look at our flies, I find there's a real difference and breakdown. You guys probably won't think this way, but I don't think there's one of you sitting out there that doesn't have a woolly bugger in your fly box. Am I right? Most of the woolly buggers that I see when I go into shops and stores are not tied correctly. I say that because when I designed the seal bugger, the first thing I wanted to do was make something more suggestive, something that would appeal to fish. You guys, the fly that you fish with, do you think you can match what a trout sees and eats every day? You're not even close. You can clone it to look like it, but can you make it act like it? As I travel the world fishing different lakes in different countries, whether I'm in New Zealand, Argentina, Chile, Germany, Italy, France, Scandinavian countries, Canada, Alaska, mostly here in the western states, I've fished probably 500 lakes in my lifetime. And in doing that, I've logged every fish that I've ever caught from the first bluegill when I was 6 years old. I've got every fish that I've landed, what lake it was, how big it was, what I caught it on, the date. Now my log, I have all kinds of information there that might pertain to that lake if I come back to it in case it's one that I don't get around to very often. But when you guys are fishing a lake that you know, there's a problem with not doing what you need to do. Like when I'm guiding, geez, as soon as the guy catches 3, 4, 5 fish, I say, Jack, we got to change the fly. He says, what the hell do we have to do that for? We spent a half hour finding, now I find something that's working. You want to change it? I said, yeah. Why do you think I would say that? Why would I do that? When you guys are fishing and you have a fly that's working, guess what? You aren't changing that fly. You're going to stay with it until the bite stops, correct? And if that's not what you do, you might move looking for them because you're assuming that the fly that you have on end of your line is a good match for what they're eating. You guys, that applies to dry flies more than anything else. Streams, rivers, lakes, it doesn't make any difference. Since all flies are tied to imitate food, you got to put your fly where fish eat, not where they rest. There's two places on all these lakes that I fished around the world. And each lake, there's no two the same. Different size, different depths, different habitats, different altitudes, different times of the year that I was there. And if you want to catch big fish, you know the easiest thing that you have to do? Go where there are big fish. And every lake you fish has big fish in it. The numbers may be smaller, but they're there. So if you want to catch them, you guys, you have to apply your skills in the time that you're on the water where they go when they want to eat. That's the first thing I do when I'm guiding somebody. This is where you'll find fish, and I show them. And here's the best part about it, you guys. There's only two places on any lake where trout go when they want to eat. You guys know where they are? Those two places? Because if you don't know, where are you going to go? You see, you need to know where the fish are, where you're going to put your fly, and you need to know how far down they are. If you don't know the answer to those two questions, here goes the trial and error. And you're going to spend a lot of time making casts that don't work. If you guys use a cast and retrieve form of presentation, what if you go home and you had a 20 fish day? You're going to be beaming from one ear to the other. Your wife's going to say, "How'd you do, honey?" And you're going to say, "God, it was great, you know." Good, because now she knows she can tell you to cut the lawn, take the garbage out or whatever, and you aren't going to moan or groan. But I've seen guys go home where they didn't have a good day, and all they do is growl when their wife asks them how you did. You guys, here, I'm going to try to cover with you what I would do if I were guiding and you were my client. Here's what you have to know. Two places where trout go to eat. The first one is shoreline edges. When I start my day, and it's in the summer months, not in the spring or fall, and there's a reason for that. I'll explain it in a second. Shoreline edges, every fly you have in your fly box, no matter what you call it, it doesn't make any difference, but there is a difference in the patterns in what are suggestive flies and those that are insect imitations. Suggestive flies are buggers, leeches, and minnow imitations. They suggest food to a fish. The other flies, all the rest of them, how many of you guys, I want to see a show of hands, how many of you guys have hare's ear in your fly boxes? Just about everybody. If you don't, you've missed the boat somewhere. How about pheasant tail nymphs? Prince nymphs? Most of the hands are going up, you guys. What do you guys think those flies imitate? You have any idea? They work. That's why you have them. Do you know that everybody has a favorite color and a favorite pattern? In all the years that I've guided, I'll put my fly box out there and I said, you can pick one of these. And usually the guy has something that he's tied or he wants to try. Fine, go for it. And if he's struggling, he looks at me and then he's looking at that box and he's thinking, well, I got to find something else. You guys, you don't have to find something else. There's nothing wrong with what you have. The problem is your presentation of it. When we talk presentation, we're talking everything that you do when you're on the water, including the boat that you fish out of, your cast, your retrieve, the line you use, the fly you use, the tippet leader, angle that you pull it through the water. You guys, when I make a cast and I don't get a strike, I get pissed. Why did I miss that fish? If you spent 6 hours on a lake casting and retrieving a fly, and you landed 20 fish, you're going to be a happy camper because we measure our success in numbers and size. To me, you had a lousy day and you don't even know it. You know why? Because if you fish 6 hours, you're going to make a minimum of 200 casts. And 20 fish, that means 180 casts failed. So why do we fail? I wasn't with you guys the last time you fished a lake this past year. I didn't have to be, but I know why you had one of those days where you didn't catch 20 fish, and even if you did, why do we fail so much more than we succeed when we put a fly in the water? You know what the answer is? Guys, there's no fish there to see your fly. That's why you're not getting hit. So that has to do, in my last book that I wrote, there's a chapter in there called positioning. That's where you go when you're making your casts. There's things that you can do that I think are very effective, and there's things that you do that are not effective. But if you haven't done this very much, or you're struggling, you're not going to know how to separate them, because you got all these different options to figure out, is the fly, is it the line, the retrieve, where I'm fishing, the depth, the angle? What's wrong? Think about it. When you go to a lake and you have a 20, 30 fish day, haven't you just proved that the fly works, the line works, the location worked, the depth that you fished it, the speed that you pulled it? All of that is what you're going to do again the next time you go. A week goes by and you go back and you had 4 strikes and you landed 2 fish. You are not the problem. Didn't you prove that that fly and that method worked? So something's changed, hasn't it? You guys, and what that something is, the man upstairs messing with you. It's something that he's doing that's affecting trout behavior. So when I have things that work, I jot it down and I look at all the options. If numbers are important, and to me, numbers are not important, I'm after Walter. I want the big fish in the lake. And I have a pretty good idea where I can spend my time to try to catch them. And I'm successful occasionally. I've caught a lot of big fish in my lifetime. Once in a while, it was an accident. But for the most part, it isn't. Because I've learned what works and what doesn't work. And these are the things that I try to point out to guys when I'm guiding them and we're on the water, because so many of you guys are making mistakes that you don't even know you're making. But if you catch 3, 4, 5 fish, what else are you going to do? You're going to repeat what you've been doing. So I'm trying to leave you with some thoughts and things that you can do that are going to help. All right, let's talk about the first area, shoreline edge. Why is it so effective? Because that's where the protoplankton and zooplankton in a lake is located. Do you know what that means? That's the food factory for the insects. Not just what the fish eat, but what the insects eat. Without it, let's take a reservoir. Guys, it took me a long time to understand this, but I learned it through trial and error. Reservoirs can be really good and they can be really bad. I can remember when I was in high school and we were fishing Bridgeport Reservoir in California. And the year before, Bridgeport got really, really low. It was a drought year, and they had a lot of rough fish in it. So the fishing game decided, we're going to drain it. We're going to get rid of all these rough fish. Hold the outlet back, and we'll fill it back up. Replant it for opening day in the spring. And of course, that hit the LA Times, and there was about 6,000 to 10,000 people showed up at Bridgeport the next year because Fish and Game reported that they put in over 10,000 trout, half of which were broodstock, 5 pounds or better. You couldn't find a road or a weed or a piece of sagebrush that there wasn't a camper or someone camped on it. I mean, that lake was, there were a lot of people there. And they have a store in town called Ken's Sporting Goods, and they have a couple ice boxes out in front of it. If you caught a big fish, you took it in there and they put it in there and put your name on it and showed this big fish so that you know what was caught on opening day. On this opening day, there were only about 8 fish in that ice box. And the fishing game guys, there were four of them over there, and they were talking. And I walked over and I said, "What did you guys see out there on the lake today?" Uh, I spent 4 hours. I had one strike. And he says, "Well, you're going to find, and you guys, you can take this to the bank because what I learned then is still true today. When a reservoir is dropped down really, really, really low and they refill it the next year, the nutrients have to settle. So as the lake is filling, it wasn't settling. The chemistry of the water was off. The pH was out of sync. And so what do fish do when they're stressed for oxygen? They go down. So now let's go back to the area. In other words, what I'm telling you guys, if you're going to fish a reservoir and it was really, really low from the prior year, you guys get there and you find that the water is off color, that's usually a pretty good indication. And you're going to find it isn't going to fish well. It's going to take a while for the nutrients to settle and the protoplankton and zooplankton to reestablish itself. So then the lake has a way of supplying the fish with food. In the meantime, they have to find something else. And in many cases, they don't. And they're on the thin side until you get into the summer months and then in the fall. Okay, shoreline edges is your prime area where I fish at first light. Big fish that you want to catch, know that if they go into a shoreline area, they're subject to predation. In other words, they don't have any cover. So a big fish never goes into shallow water. I'm tempted to underline that word never. Rarely will they go into shallow water because they know they can be seen by predators. So they need cover. Cover comes in the form of wind ripple and darkness. That's why when I start my day on Upper Klamath, I'm out there before that sun hits the water, and I'm already into them, and they're big. It's hard not to go out and catch 5 to 10 fish in the mornings fishing for 2 or 3 hours. And most of those fish are going to be over 4. And almost every day I had, no, I won't tell you that. Sounds like I'm boasting, but a lot of big fish over 10. Anyway, you guys, when you fish a shoreline area, I'm going to tell you what you need to do and probably what you are doing, which is wrong. It's not the best place to fish if you have a boat and motor. Anything other than a pontoon or a belly boat or some boat, if you have a boat and you have an electric motor up front, you can use your foot to control angle and speed. That leaves your hands free to cast. When you fish a shoreline edge, you want to position yourself never facing the shoreline where you make a cast straight in. Don't do that because you're holding in one spot. The guy that moves always outfishes the guys that sit still because you're covering water. So when you're fishing a shoreline edge, I use suggestive flies, buggers, leeches, or minnow imitation. I don't use the small stuff because the presentation of a small fly is totally different than it is buggers, leeches, and minnows. If you doubt that, think back of how the strikes occur. When you're using a bugger, you remember how aggressive the fish are when they take it? Not true when you use small flies. There's a reason for it. You know what it is? Took me a long time to understand this concept, but I had a biologist with the fishing game explain it to me one day, 40 some years ago. He said, "Denny, when a fish sees your fly, he may think it's food, but he's not really sure because of the way we fish it." Stop and think about it, you guys, as you fish a bugger. I was having a conversation with a gentleman earlier that was your Fly Terrier of the Year or whatever, and nice award to win. And I asked him if he tied those flies, and he said he did, and he puts a bead on the front. Beads seem to have captured the imagination of tyers and fishermen everywhere. I don't even know how to put a bead on a hook. And the guys, there's 4 or 5 that I've met in my lifetime. Half of them, some of them I've taught the Stillwater game too, based on what I learned and what I knew, and they've gotten even better. Not one of them uses a bead. A bead would be fine if it's streams and rivers, guys, because they'll get you to the bottom where you want to be if you're fishing wet. On a lake, drops your fly in an unnatural manner. You guys stop and think about what it is you're imitating. There's only two food sources on a lake that go this way. And if you're casting, retrieving, which way you bring in your fly? You're moving it parallel in the water, aren't you? And a lot of times I see guys cast and they're counting and they're letting it get down. I say, why are you doing that? Well, I want to get down 2-3 feet. What are you imitating? If it's a bug or a leech, okay, you might find them. But you guys, I've only told you one spot to fish. And before I move on to this other spot, because it's even more important, remember this. When you fish a shoreline area, I cast in. I want to get it as close to the edge of the rocks or the brush, whatever it is, as I can. When I bring it back to me, don't bring it back to the boat. Pick it up and recast after 5 feet. There's a reason for it. And if you do it anyway, you're going to be wasting a lot of time and you're not going to catch fish. Why? Because a fish, when he sees the fly, will not turn from his feeding lane and follow it out into deep water. You think they do? They don't. You guys know I learned something fishing Upper Klamath 30 years ago. And it's guided me every day that I'm on the water. And what I learned, I was going along the channel. I have an electric motor up in front, and I was sitting there, I was casting in, and I made a cast up by the brush on one of the channels that feeds that lake. And I saw this big swirl, and I could tell it was a big fish, but he didn't touch the fly. And I retrieved it back. If it was you, where's your next cast going? It's going right back in there, isn't it? I've been doing it for the 30 years since that day. Guess what? I've never caught a fish, not one on the second cast. Not one. They don't come back. You guys, when you're fishing, and if you're gonna fish a spot, maybe you want to kick, maybe you don't, maybe you're gonna put an anchor down. I make sure that when I'm guiding clients, anchors stay in the car. I don't want them out on the boat. We're going to be moving all day. We're going to move slow, but we're going to cover the water. So as you move along and you're casting in, bring it back about 5 feet from the end after you've made your cast. If you don't get hit, pick up, move it up 5 feet and put it back in there again. You're covering water, but you're going to find that when the fly hits, if the fish is there, they don't saunter up to it. What color is that? And how long is that tail? They don't do that. You guys, the take is instant, and it's going to be aggressive, and they're going to be big. Little guys and big guys don't run together. It's one or the other. Sometimes there may be a bunch that are all about the same size, but that's what you have to do. Cover your area, but you've got a time frame that you're going to have to live with, and that time frame is going to be, if it's in the morning months, once the lake is warmed, you probably have till about 9 o'clock. You won't have to wonder when to change flies or change the method of fishing the shoreline edge. The fish will tell you. They'll tell you by you're not getting hit anymore. You can go along the shoreline, you guys, casting in. You may only hook 3 or 4 fish, but they'll be the biggest fish you're going to catch all day. 80% of all the big trout I've caught in my lifetime were caught in the morning hours, not the evening. You can get them in the evening, but there's a difference between the two. You ever stop to think about it? In the morning, the water's cold. It's cooled all night, and it's slowly warming. In the evening, it's already warmed. Now it's cooling, and it may not be the temperature that the fish want. You guys stop and think about when you're struggling on those days where you did well last week and you're not doing well today. I told you Mother Nature is messing with you. You know how she does it? She does it through different conditions. So I learned in my first book that I ever wrote on Stillwater, that was the first chapter, so that you guys understand when you're not hooking fish and it's a lake, especially one that you know, the problem is that, and probably this is true 50% of the time, maybe more than that, is water temperature. Trout do not like cold water, and they don't like water that's so warm that the oxygen levels are low. They stress from both, and their form of adjustment is to go down. A fish will pick a depth where they have safety, water over their back, where the oxygen and the temperature are to their liking. You guys, when you're chasing fish down in the lake, never assume that all the hours of that day are going to be the same. You're going to see this. There's going to be peaks and valleys in most of the days that you fish. That doesn't mean you won't catch fish on the downward side of the day. But I'm just warning you, water temperature, fish use it. It depends on what they eat, how much they eat, when they eat, how they react to your fly when they spawn. Everything a trout does is geared to water temperature. And if it's below 40, you're going to find them very, very lethargic. Most lakes, they'll see your fly, but they won't react to it because water temperature controls their metabolism. Metabolism is the rate that they digest food and how aggressive they'll be. When you're using buggers and leeches, you guys, you can expect aggressive hard strikes. And I count every fly that I've ever fished. I know how many strikes I had on that day, how many fish I landed on it. When I change it, I just jot it down and it goes in my log. If I have a fly and I caught 5 fish, and that's usually when I switch, but it took 16 strikes to catch 5 fish. I changed to a smaller fly because I saw fish working on top. It took 6 casts to get 5 fish. Which is the better fly? They both worked, but I spent almost a half hour with this one and I only spent 10 minutes with this one. So these are the things that you got to look at. Now, you guys, there's one thing I'm going to cover with you right now that's really, really critical. This took me, oh boy, I struggled with this one for 10 years. And I didn't think there were many things in my presentation that I had holes in, that I couldn't figure out what I was doing wrong. And you guys probably do the same thing that I did. So let's get it corrected right now. When you go to the small flies, hare's ear, pheasant tail, prince nips, that stuff, do you know what they imitate? You know why you have them? Yes, they catch fish, but do you know why? It has to do with the depth and the retrieve that you use with them. The most important part of your presentation aspect is not your fly, guys. It's your fly line, because the line controls the depth and angle that your fly will move through the water. The other place where trout, you'll find them, is the top foot. Not every day. What if they're not on the shore? It's after 9 o'clock. They've left that shoreline area and they've gone into deeper water. You'll know it because the strike ratios will start to drop off. It's pretty consistent. Happens almost every day. What are they waiting for? If it's in the summer months, they're waiting for the aquatic insects to get going. What keys a hatch? Water temperature. And it's how long the insect has been in the water. It's like a woman who's pregnant, going to give birth after 9 months. Most insects, it's 2 to 3 years. We imitate. There's 4 insects that go from the bottom to the top in Stillwater. Do you guys know which 4 they are? Mayflies, caddisflies, damselflies, and midges. Those are the 4. Every fly you have in your fly box right now that isn't a bugger, leech, or minnow imitation imitates one stage of aquatic insects. Did you know that? Because that's what the fish is going to take it for. So you have to match that stage. Of the 4 insects I just mentioned, we match them in 3 different stages. Larva, where are larvae found in a lake? On the bottom. Stream, river, lake, it's the same. They live and eat on the bottom. Pupa, they transform from the larva stage into the pupa stage and they start working their way to the surface. You can catch them. How many of you guys have had, and if you fish lakes at all, this has happened to you not once, but a lot. You make your cast, nothing happens, and you bring it back, bring it back, bring it back. When it gets right here and you're ready to pick it up and make another cast, boom, fish hits you right here. You remember that? And it happens a lot. On a given day, it will. I learned something about that fishing a lake that I guide on down where I live. It was after 9 o'clock, and I'd had a good morning using buggers, leeches, just keep switching, see if there's some inkling to a particular color or pattern. And they really didn't care. It was my presentation of it because I kept fishing it where I knew they would see it. And then around 9:30, the guy that I had out that day was a biologist that worked at the hatchery. He couldn't catch a goldfish in a bathtub. But the guy really wanted to learn, so I'm showing him what to do. And notice that the bite was slowly starting to drop off. You guys will see this. Remember, when the bite starts to change, something's happening. The Mother Nature is messing with you. If it's not water temperature, what else do we have to look at that affects trout feeding behavior? Could be the wind or lack of. Could be the direction of the wind. You ever stop to think about that? Trout do not like a north or an east wind. Remember the old saying, fish from the north don't go forth? Fish from the east, trout feed least. Fish from the west, fishing's best. Fish from the south moves the food in the fish's mouth. You got 2 good angles and you got 2 that aren't so good. I've been on a lake with a buddy of mine. I was teaching him Stillwater game, and we had a 20 fish morning. It was around 10 o'clock, and I noticed the wind had switched directions, was coming out of the north. Well, it was a pea time anyway. I was starting to kick into shore. He says, "Where are you going?" I said, "Well, I'm going to go take a little break. The bite's going to go to hell." He said, "Well, how do you know that?" "Let's see what happens. You keep throwing." 30 minutes later, he's sitting next to me. "How'd you know that we were going to stop hitting?" You guys, I've seen it stop like flipping a light switch. Fish stopped hitting, and the wind merely changed directions from the north. As soon as it changed or stopped, the bite came back. I don't have a clue why that is. Full moons? You guys fish in the full moon? Fish will feed in the full moon. If you fish at night, you ever stop and think about the moon's the same as the sun? If the fish is here and your fly is above him, he has to look up to see it, doesn't he? So what does the moon up here do to the fly? Fish is always looking at it from the underside, but it leaves a silhouette. Stop and think about it, you guys. If you fished at night where there was no moon, just pitch black, what color of fly would you use? You guys have any idea? Most guys will pick a dark colored fly. If there's no moon up there, it doesn't make any difference. They can't see it anyway. There's nothing to shine and nothing to see a silhouette from. That's what the sun does, you guys. That's what the moon does. It gives them something to see. But you can still catch fish. Now the question is why? Do you know what a fish uses when he can't see the object? He uses his sonar system, which is his lateral line. With the membranes there, he can tell when an object hits the water what direction it's going and how fast it's moving and how big it is, just through his sonar system. I learned that when I fished at night, they don't like things move fast. They want to move slow. And I don't fish deep. I fish in the top 2 feet. Of all the fish you guys. If I went back 10 years, time, say 500, that's 5,000 fish over 4 pounds that I've landed. Do you know how many of those fish I caught in water deeper than 8 feet? Zip. I don't fish deep. You can go out with a chronomid, put it under an indicator. If you want to make it easy, leave the fly rod at home. You can do just as well, if not better, with a spinning rod and a big bubble out there. Fish don't know what holds the fly up. And I tease the guys that chronomid fish. I don't have the patience for it. And there's some guys that are really good. It's a method that works. How did it get started in this country? Guys from the United States went up to Canada, and all the Canadian guides showed them what they do with a chronomid. And they came back and started telling people. Next thing you know, it's in the magazine articles and everybody. Now it's a favorite from everybody because it requires absolutely zero skill. You think I'm wrong? When you put it out there, casting is not a problem because you don't cast when you're using chronomid and an indicator. You can drop it right off the end of your rod tip, back up 6 feet and sit there and look at that stupid little ball, wait for it to move. And if it's a nice flat day with no wind, why would a trout eat something hanging upside down? And if you look at the stages, because I only told you 2 of them, larva on the bottom, pupa, move through the water. And when the pupa reaches the top, he stops. In this case, we're using an indicator and putting the fly down on the bottom. So is it the fly or is it the depth that's most important? I always ask the guys when I'm guiding them, they want to fish that way. I said, what's the most important? Most of them will tell me depth. I sure? How do you know that? Well, they always seem to take the bottom fly, and if it's 10 feet of water, I put it down to about 9 feet down. Well, why don't you try reversing the 2 flies? Because most of the fish you're going to catch are going to be on the bottom fly, right? And they tell me, yeah. Then let's reverse the flies. The one up here, put it on the bottom. If you continue to get strikes, what does that say? Then it is the depth, because the trout don't care. But if they don't take that fly or they go to the one back up here, then it's the fly that's more important. Why is that important to you? Are you imitating the larva stage or the pupa stage? When I ask that question, I get this crosshair to look back. And they don't know, and they don't care because they're catching fish, and who cares as long as you're catching fish? It can't be the larva because they live on the bottom, not a foot off the bottom. Can't be the pupa because when they start up, they don't stop. Why would they go a foot and stop? Plus, they're hanging upside down. If you don't have any ripple, you don't catch. So, the reason I mentioned that little exercise for you, here's what you guys got to look for. I'm going to tell you something I've been telling guys, put it on my Facebook page. I haven't written an article, and I'm not going to do another book on it. But boy, does it take the majority of my time now. First and latter part of the day, it's going to be bugger, leech, or minnow for me. Do you guys know the most aggressive strikes? Do you know what fly the fish prefer over everything else you have in your fly box? Minnows. They're the highest protein value of all the food sources in a lake. And when a fish sees a minnow, just remember this. This is important. If you're going to fish a minnow imitation, do it early and late. Forget the midday time frame. Trout know that fish do not leave their cover and go out on open water. And if you find minnows in open water, go find another spot to fish. That tells you there's no big fish around, or the minnows wouldn't be away from their cover, because their cover's on the shoreline, where they can get in an inch, 2, 3 inches, or a foot of water away from the big guys. But here's something that you guys do. And when you're switching to say a hare's ear or whatever small nip that you have on, you guys remember this. That particular fly is a pupa imitation. It's not a larva, may be similar, but larvae you fish in the bottom. I haven't seen one guy, not one, And I don't think any of you guys do it either. Go out and fish larvae on the bottom of a lake. You know why? Because you're going to pick up moss, weeds, snags. Do it 2 or 3 times and watch how fast you change. You'll find another way of presenting the fly. 4 ways to do it. Fish dry flies on top, use an indicator. You can troll or you can cast and retrieve. There's your 4 options. On a good day, all 4 will work. Fish don't care. But you're going to still see this. When the bite starts to wane, it's usually a temperature thing. The 2 places where fish feed, shoreline edge and the top foot, because that's where the insects are going to stop. Here's how you fish a pupa. And if you guys want to find all the information you want on how to do this, you can go to your computer. You can go to Google. I'm not a computer guy. Jesus, it's all I can do to learn how to turn those things on. But I learned this part. When fish feed on aquatic insects, they take them different. Depending on the retrieve that you're going to use, you guys, insects move slow, don't they? Does this look like you when you're out there and you see fish rolling and there's one rolling over there and there's another one rolling over there and you make a cast to him? When your fly hits the water, what are you going to do next? Aren't you going to retrieve it? If you don't retrieve it, what happens to the fly? Sinks, doesn't it? I have guys do this all the time. If I don't tell them not to do it, they're going to do it. They'll cast and count to 10, 15 before they start to retrieve. And they say, why are you letting it sink? They don't know. Well, I've caught fish doing this. Okay, that's good reason. You don't know what else to do. You guys, the pupa form of an aquatic insect, when fish switch from shoreline edges where the food is, but they don't want to be in there because they've lost their cover. They don't have darkness and there's no wind ripples. So they're going to move off into the depths. When they leave the shoreline area, do you know where they're going? They're not going to a spot that's 30 feet out in the middle of the lake, because trout, you guys, instinctively, they were born to conserve energy, not spend it. So every opportunity they get to conserve energy, they will do it. What does that mean to you? That means that in lakes, a feeding fish is always moving. He's not stationary. He's moving, he's hunting. A stream or a river, trout use a current to bring the food to them. Not on a lake, it's just the opposite. They have to go find it, but they know where it's at. So if they're not feeding on a shoreline, maybe the water's too warm, there isn't enough oxygen, and they didn't even go in there that day. And if they do go in there, it's going to be at first light when the water's at its coolest point. So now you're out there and there's hatches starting to occur, and it's usually going to be around shallow areas and weed beds. So learn where those are. I hear a lot of guys say, well, I'll fish the inlet. There's only one advantage to fishing an inlet into a lake if it's not spawning time. It's because it's bringing colder water in. That's a temperature and oxygen thing. It's not because it's bringing food in. There isn't any more food coming in on that creek than there is on any stream or river during the mid part of the day. But when you see the rings, you guys, here's where I struggled terrible with this. I designed a line with the Cortland Line Company, which is a 7-foot intermediate sink tip. It's an intermediate line, or it's a floating line, and the end 7 feet is a camo tip. Just sinks 7 feet, and it's designed to keep the fly up. Of all the food sources that you find in a lake, there's only 2 that move parallel through the water. Do you know which 2 they are? Minnows and damsels. Everything else, you guys, is up and down. So what are you doing when you cast and retrieve? Moving your fly parallel. You can still catch fish. You guys, back up for just a second. When you troll, you guys troll when you're fishing a lake? You know, you guys troll? Pretty effective method, isn't it? Do you know why it's effective? And when you hook the fish, do you know from what direction he came? You probably don't. Guess where he didn't come from? It's the same as when you cast the fly into a shoreline edge, and I told you don't bring it out more than 5 feet because the fish will not follow your fly to you. You're wasting time. When you hook a fish trolling, 99% of the time they come in from the side. Did you know that? If you doubt what I just told you, land him and look and see where the hook is. You're going to find it in this corner or this corner. Where don't you find it? In the upper or lower lip. Unless he took it just as soon as the fly hit the water, if you're lucky enough to have that happen to you. So when a fish in a lake, if you think he comes up from behind your fly and nails it, you are 100% incorrect. They don't do that. They come in from the side. So remember that. When you hook a fish trolling, turn yourself around and go back through that area again, because if there's one, there's probably more in that area. You ever notice that when you're getting strikes and all of a sudden you go for a ways and you haven't had a strike in the last 10, 20 minutes? Because you're fishing in water with no fish. They don't see it. Okay, pupa. How do you fish the pupa form? There's nothing on the internet. Go and look. You won't find anything. I haven't written any article yet. I keep messing with it. I keep telling people this is what I learned when I was on a lake up in Wyoming after struggling with this for well over 10 years. You guys, I'd see the fish roll and I'd cast to him. I couldn't catch him. What the hell was I doing wrong? I couldn't figure out what I was doing wrong. And then by accident, I discovered it. Here's what's happening that you don't know, that you should know. Trust me, there's not a lot of people across the United States that I've told this to. But I do when I'm giving talks. I'll do it one of these days, maybe with an article. When you see a ring, the fish is feeding, in case you didn't know it, they're always cognizant of the stage of the insect. They don't care if it's a mayfly, a caddis, a damsel, or a midge. They don't care. When those 4 insects get to the top, they stop. There's one of the 4 that swim to shore. Which one is it? Damsel. And they'll swim about that far under. You see them wiggling like that, going to shore. They're looking for any port in a storm to crawl out, just like a dragonfly. The other 3 hang in the film. So when you see rings, you guys, go to where you see a ring and see if there's a bubble in the middle of it. If they're on the dry fly, that's what you're going to find. What the fish is doing is he's swimming, always looking up. And when he sees the insect there, he'll come up. And here's another thing you can do to tell that they're taking dries. After he takes it, he zips forward quickly. That's not what they do when they're eating pupa. They swim very slow. And when they open their mouth and suck in the food, they keep right on going very slow. They just drop down 2-3 inches. So if you see a ring, could be if there's a ring and you don't see the fish, that's your key. If you don't see the trout, they're sucking the dry fly under. You cannot fish a pupa below the surface when they're taking the adult. They will not take it. And I got years and cast after cast after cast trying to catch them, and I couldn't do it until I discovered what I was doing wrong. And I'll tell you, next time I come down. Here it is, guys, and it's very, very simple to match. When you see the fish porpoise shows his back and his tail fin, he's on pupa. Those are the bigger fish. Now you got him. I was on this lake in Wyoming, had a really good morning catching 5 to 10 pound rainbows and browns on steel buggers. And the bite was starting to slip, and I knew it was going to slip. And I told Garth, the guy I was fishing with, I said, I'm going over by that weed bed. That hatch that comes off around 10 o'clock is going to come, and those fish are going to start feeding on them. And he says, oh, you're going to go do that pupa thing again, aren't you? And I said, I got to figure this out. I got the fly, I got the line, but I'm doing something wrong. So I got over there, and I could see this one fish porpoising. So you guys, this is what you do, because when you see the fish, you're going to do the same thing that I did. You lead him 3 or 4 feet out in front of him. When the fly hits, you know what I did wrong for 10 years? Real slow. Slow and short pulls. Didn't work. And I knew this is what I've been doing, and it was a repeat. Then I thought, wait a minute. You guys probably don't know this name, but there's a fellow by the name of Hal Jensen that was really ahead of me on the Stillwater side. He just didn't write about it, but really, really a good Stillwater fisherman. And he said something to me 15 years ago, and I didn't put two and two together when he told me this, but boy, was he 100% correct. You guys remember this. When a fish sees your fly, especially on those back end of the retrieves, just as you're ready to pick up and make another cast, and the fish takes, he said, Denny, remember, when your fly is moving in an upward angle, trout never take on the pull. Did you know that? They don't. He said they always take on the pause between the pulls. Now stop and analyze this, you guys. What was he trying to tell me? And I didn't put it together. When you pause on the way up, what happens to your fly? Drops back down, doesn't it? Doesn't go down fast. But here's the best part. The tippet on your line holds the head of the fly up. So the bend of the hook is down below. When you pause, the fly cannot tip over. That's why you don't use beads for this. When you pause, the fly will drop like this in the same position, exactly the same as the natural. And a fish that's been sitting there, when I had that fishing game guy out with me, he says, Denny, and he had all these meters and all these instruments, and he says, do you know what water temperature was when we got here? And I said, yeah, I checked it. It was 56, 57, good temperature. He says, you know what it is now? He says, it's 60. I said, what does that mean? He says, you're not getting the strikes that you were hooking. I haven't seen you hook a fish in the last half hour. I said, I know. They've stopped. He says, well, I know why. Why? Tell me. You guys, you face this every day you're on a lake and you don't know what's happening. Here's what's happening. The pH in the water's changed. The temperature, as it heats up from the sun, has less oxygen. How does the fish adjust for it? He merely drops down 2 or 3 feet. As you bring your fly up through the level that he's at, he takes it. That's why they wait until they see this. They aren't going to chase it because they'd have to move up higher where you're fishing it. Do you see what I'm saying as far as the depth and what's going on? Okay, pupa. When you see that fish and you cast and you lead him and the fly hits, don't do anything. Count to 5. 1,001, 1,002. When you get to 1,003, the fly will have already tipped into this position. At 3, the whole thing's going to start to sink. It may only go 1/4 to 1/2 inch. That's all you need. The fish, as he was cruising, and I could see him over there, all of a sudden, he's got my fly, and he goes airborne, and he's hauling ass. I landed him. Gar says, what did you do? I says, I'm not going to tell you. I've got to try this again. Let's see if it works again. So I pick out another one. It's porpoising. I lead him. I started to count to 5. I never got to 5. Picked up the fly, and he hauls ass, and he's jumping, and I said, Jesus, it's 2 for 2. Well, I made a third cast and hooked the third one. 3 for 3 were before might be 1 in 50. 3 casts, 3 hookups. So I went over and told Garth what I was doing. So Garth makes his cast, and I can see his line laying there, and I see the line back up, and I said, you got him. He says, I didn't feel anything. I said, raise your rod tip, and he raised it, and he missed him. What had happened is the fish took his fly, felt the tension, and spit it back out. So here's what we do with the presentation. Make your cast leading the fish and count to 5 and don't do anything. Just let the fly sink. It's only going to go down about that far. So you need a fly line that will keep the fly up there. Here's one thing, you guys, write it down, put it in your memory, but don't forget it. You can never, on a stillwater situation, ever allow the fly to go below the level that the fish are cruising or feeding. Can't do it. If you do it, you get a zip, because fish never look down for food. They look at their level or up. Danger comes from above, food's above. That means your ability to put a fly on the water and keep it above the level of the fish, you're going to catch a lot of fish. And when the bite stops, they've moved. The conditions that exist are what's going to move them. Not only from one spot to another, but up and down. May only be 2 or 3 feet. But you guys, you have to make adjustments for that. Okay? So here, remember, here's what we do now. We count to 5. Then after 5 seconds, pull the retrieve about 8 to 10 inches and do it very, very slow. There's a reason for it. If the fish has picked up your fly and you didn't feel it, when you pull it, you'll put tension. Then he'll bolt. Garth spit it out, but you won't have that happen to you if you pull a small retrieve. I do it twice. 5 count in a strip, 5 count and strip. If I haven't hooked a fish, I pick up and recast to another spot. Never to the same spot. For the same reason as that trout that I saw in the creek. I saw a boil and I cast. I didn't finish that story, but I'll finish it now. And he didn't come back. And I asked you, where would you put your next cast? You guys, we always cast back in there thinking maybe this is the one he's going to take it. 30 years I've been doing it. I'm still doing it, and I still haven't caught him, but maybe the next time I will. But here's the lesson to be learned out of that one. When they see it and say no, guys, they don't come back and say yes on the next cast. Maybe another fish, but not that one. So if it's a big fish you're after, and remember this, when the sun gets high and the shoreline is okay and there's enough cover, could be weeds, could be logs, could be rocks, fish will hide in there, big fish will. And when a little minnow or something goes by out there, they'll jump out there and get it and go right back in. And they ambush for a while until the water temperature gets bad. If you guys do not find fish on the shoreline or in the top foot, if there's fish feeding up on top, put the big stuff away, go to the small stuff. I use a 7-foot tip because it keeps my fly in the zone. Just remember this, if you keep retrieving, you're moving parallel, and that's what I did wrong for 10 years. I was moving the fly this way and they didn't want it that way. The natural you're imitating is stationary, and they know the difference. Okay, it's getting late, you guys. I'm going to finish this with one thing that's a part of your presentation that's an important part. That's your leader and tippet. I got to see a show of hands, and I know how many hands are going to go up. How many of you guys, when you fish a lake, use 3X or lighter tippet? You guys are the ones that need my help. When you use 3X, you're going to break off. Do you know why that is? Anybody bought a rod lately? From the whoever? Do you notice how stiff they're getting? The graphite that they're using? Because the manufacturers and fly rods know that a stiff rod is so much easier to cast that it makes you look good. You may not be good, but it makes you look good. Soft rods that are whippy are hard to learn to cast. Now, let's picture this. You're on the water and you make your cast. And in this lake, there's big fish out there. And you start stripping, and boy, that big fish pounds into that thing, and you rear back to set the hook. You know, when you lose a fish, you lose them in 2 places. It's always the same. Either when you're setting the hook or when you're trying to net them. No margin for error. If it's one of the 2, that's where you're going to lose them. So because the rods are so fast, there's always someone that asks me, what do I use? You guys, I use 1X. Oh, why why do you use something so heavy? Because of fluorocarbon. Fluorocarbon changed the whole thing, you guys. It allows you, how can you set a hook on a rod so stiff, it's just going to break 3, 4, 5x. And the fish you're going to lose is the one you want to tell mama about. It's one of those big guys like that, and you're not going to be a happy camper. So you guys, just remember, you have to use heavier tippet. I know you won't do it, but I make leaders that I use monofilament leaders. And the guy says, doesn't monofilament reflect light and leave a shadow? I said, yep. Then why do you use it? Because it has memory. You know what that means? I can straighten it by stretching it. Can't do that with fluorocarbon. But fluorocarbon has a density the same as water, which means it's almost invisible to fish. Bottom line, they don't care about the diameter. They don't spook from it. So I take a 9-foot OX leader, which is 13, 14 pound, and put 3 feet of fluorocarbon on the end, and that's what I sell. And no one else in the United States is doing this yet. I have guys tell me, boy, you better put a patent on that before someone copies it. Well, you can do it. Just buy a monofilament leader and put a fluorocarbon tippet on it. When you add to a 9-foot leader, you must do so in increments of 3 feet so it'll balance and turn over. And if on the package, if it says 9-foot OX, then you add 1X. If it says 9-foot 2X, then you add 3X. When you add, you have to come down 1X so it's balanced and turn over. You guys, I've got so much more to tell you, but you guys have got some other things to do. So anyway, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me. I hope what I covered with you changes the way you approach this a little bit. It's all on the book. If you're interested, they run $40. Anyway, thanks for having me.
Well, let's see if we have a couple of questions. I have my first question. You're talking about taking your boat and casting shore. How far are you casting to get within a few feet of shore? So if you're going to cast 50 feet, accurate to shore, strip 5 feet and cast again, you got to be able to cast. So come to Saturdays, learn to cast. Come to my lecture next month. That's a tie-in. Okay, we got a question over here.
So instead of being in a boat, you're fishing from shore. Do you always fish at an angle? And rather than straight out? And
Because lakes are tapered.
Can you repeat that?
When you guys cast in, I don't cast straight in. I'll go on an angle because the lake is tapered, which means you move that fly through that 1 to 2, 3 foot depths more. Remember, guys, fish are there for one reason, to eat. If they see your fly, you're going to get hit, and they're going to be the biggest fish of the day.
Okay.
Now you're fishing pupas, and you mentioned that you don't use beads normally, so you fish like a mid stiff or something like that. With the unweighted fly. Repeat the question.
So the question is, if you're not fishing with beads, are you? How do you get the fly down? Are you fishing with a bitch tip or what?
Just use an unweighted fly. Don't use a bead for it. You guys, this is where the key is to keep the fly above the fish. Remember, they're cruising, but they're looking for food. I forgot to tell you this, the fish that are making the rings are running 10 to 12 inches below the surface. Their priority is not for the insect, it's for the stage of the insect. That's what they're selective to. That's why they won't take a pupa when they're on the adult, and they won't take the adult when they're on the pupa. And the pupa happens before the adults do.
I'll say the question.
you were talking about taking your floating lines and putting a fishing line in intermediate fishing distance. Now, do you need that a lot, or is that just a certain purpose?
So the question is, if you're talking, oh, you're going to read.
Good question, you guys. The question is that on a sink tip line, my sink tip that I use, that I sell, is a floating line, and the end 7 feet is a camo intermediate tip on it. It keeps the fly in this much water throughout a retrieve if you want to retrieve it. We talked about trolling, you guys. The reason trolling works, you can use any line you want. I wouldn't use a floater, but any other sinking line, but you negate the sink rate of a floating line or a sinking line when you pull it forward. It can't sink. I've got one thing I gotta mention because a lot of you guys probably have them. You guys, anybody in here use sink tips that are a faster sinking rate? Do you guys use them? When you make a cast, if you're using a 10-foot tip, say, and the sink rate is a 3, that means 3 feet in 10 seconds. When you cast and you start retrieving the floating portion toward you, if you've counted 30, you're down 6 feet. 30 seconds, you'll be down 6 feet. When you pull, which way does your fly go? Everybody says up and everybody's wrong. It doesn't. It drags and it moves parallel. Think about that now. And the manufacturers don't tell you this. I learned it a long time ago because I went underneath the water and watched and saw what the fish do. You guys know that when I was underneath the water, because this was important, I went to watch what the lines did. What I noticed is the fish, anything deeper than 6 feet, they weren't moving. They weren't swimming. They weren't doing anything. They were stationary, which means they're not feeding. That's why I don't fish deep. So with the sink tip line, when you pull, it drags and it moves like this. If you're in 10 feet of water and the fish are at 9 feet, when you get just above them, that's when you want to start retrieving. You won't hang the debris and all the rest of that stuff underneath there. Watch how many more fish you catch.
So the floating line with the 3 feet of intermediate camo, is any difference between that and a midge tip that we would buy in a store?
Close.
Close, okay. Any other questions? Okay, so